It's always going to be a big blow when your most popular cabinet member resigns. French Environment Minister Nicolas Hulot stunning the nation with the way he did it. He quit live on France Inter's flagship breakfast radio program. The TV celebrity turned activist had consistently been overruled by his boss on France's continued dependence on intensive farming, nuclear power, a delay on the ban of the weed killer glyphosate. Hulot's most recent blow, a lowering of the hunting fee license. Emmanuel Macron, the enemy of environmentalists, is hardly the image he takes with him abroad, where he's painted as a tireless champion of the Paris Climate Change Accord. Like last December, when the French president hosted that One Planet summit here in Paris. The feud shows up the contrast between anti-pollution norms that are too much for the Trump administration over in the US and not enough for many here in Europe. Beyond what's presented as the choice between spurring growth and saving the planet, the fallout highlights another problem for a young president who, a little over a year ago on the campaign trail, touted his brand of neither right nor left politics that managed to draw leading lights from both the socialists and the conservatives. Instead of being a bit of both, is Macron just on the right? And if so, is this resignation a turning point? Today in the France 24 debate, Hulot Slams the Door. Joining us, award-winning documentary maker Marie-Monique Robin, also the author of The World According to Monsanto. Thank you for joining us. Thanks as well to municipal councillor who hails from Emmanuel Macron's La République En Marche party, and Le Breton, who's deputy mayor for Paris's 4th arrondissement. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome back as well to communications consultant François Chardon. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
And Alexis Poulain, co-founder of the news website Le Monde Moderne, The Modern World.
Hello.
How are you?
Good.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag F24debate. Boy, talk about theatrics. We've been scratching our heads all day in the newsroom trying to come up with a precedent. A cabinet minister quitting live without even telling his own staff. It was 8:25 a.m. on public radio.
For the first time, I will make the hardest decision of my life. I don't want to lie to myself anymore. I don't want to give the impression that my presence in this government means that we are adequately tackling these challenges. Therefore, I've made the decision to leave the government.
Are you serious?
Yes, I am.
Wow, that's a lot of bravado. Let me start with the communications consultant here. Is there a precedent? Has anyone ever seen that before? A cabinet?
Not that I know of, but you know, this ministry is supposedly doomed. I mean, his first in charge wrote about bitterly about his experience of lack of power. But here we had a Minister of State resigning live.
What is it, number 3 of the cabinet officially in order of protocol?
It's quite something, and it's unprecedented. And you've seen, even for your colleagues of France Inter, it was a major scoop for them. And they were.
What do you think, though, of the manner? What do you think of that? Is that the way a minister should resign?
It's very spectacular, and we've seen some comments that it lacked in politeness, but I don't think it's the point. I think he wanted to send a message, and this was the way to maximize the impact. And it was very efficiently done. And I think he was sincere in wanting to turn the page.
Do you think he planned it, or was this something? Because it came up in the middle of. It didn't come up at the beginning. It came up in the middle of the interview.
I think he's been thinking of resignation about a while, saying that he will take the summer to sort of reflect and tell something, and then came in the Benalla affair and said, I can't resign at this time. So the question we're here, and I think it just went in his head and said, oh, wait, we didn't do that. I can't do this. I can't do that. Oh, well, I'm a man. I have a faith in what I can do, and I have honor as well. So I think his resignation is fair. And he said after this...
The manner is fair.
Because he said, if I didn't say it live, then they would have tried to get me in back. I couldn't resign because they would have just chat in and say, oh, you can't leave, you know. So he said, enough of this. So it's like taking his freedom again. Fair enough.
And Le Breton?
No, I think it was probably a spur-of-the-moment decision, and he's a free man. He's, of course, allowed to take that decision. And I think what happened here was that, he is not a politician. And so he has never had to go through the motions of getting elected in political combat. And maybe he wasn't ready to even at my small level, things like that. You've already been through the fight of getting elected. And it's very hard. Politics is a thankless job. It's very violent. And for people like Nicolas Hulot, who's a political activist, I think it came to quite a shock to him to see what a violent world he got into. And from the beginning, there were signs that he was not comfortable with being a politician. Being a politician is very different from being an activist.
All right, so Anne Le Breton on the form, giving him a free pass. Before I turn to you, Marie-Monique Riban, let's just remind our viewers, who is Nicolas Hulot? Famous for his popular TV shows on the environment, he'd been courted by 2 previous presidents and thought long and hard before finally taking that plunge into politics when Macron was elected last year. And Ergunke has more.
Leaving his government post is a return to origins of sorts for Nicolas Hulot, who is an environmental advocate long before he was a politician. In the 1990s, Hulot was the star presenter of the hit nature show Ushuaïa, gradually becoming a household name in France. His popularity and environmental activism through the nonprofit he founded eventually caught the attention of French politicians. But skeptical of environmental action subject to the whims of government, he turned down numerous ministerial posts from Presidents Jacques Chirac, Nicolas Sarkozy, and François Hollande.
There is one thing I cannot accept. That France's ecological commitment is conditional or dependent upon political power dynamics.
French President Emmanuel Macron succeeded where his predecessors failed. Nicolas Hulot agreed to serve as the young president's ecology minister, saying his fresh approach to politics offered a new opportunity for action. But his transition to government was not without difficulties. Environmental activists have accused him of failing to sufficiently influence Macron's government after it backtracked on reducing reliance on nuclear power and on plans to ban the controversial pesticide glyphosate within 3 years. In his resignation announcement, Hulot visibly caved to the criticism. Decrying the role of powerful lobbies on environmental issues, he said he would no longer lie to himself about his ability to influence the government's ecological agenda.
Marie-Monique Riban, not a politician, but he'd been an activist for a long time. Surely he knew what he was getting into when he agreed to go into government.
I think he knew. I must confess that this morning I was very moved when I was listening to Radio France. I was biking at home,
On your stationary bike?
It was really very moving for me, and we should remember what he said before announcing that he will resign. So he said, and I want to be sure that with Anne, for instance, we're living in the same world as described by Nicolas Hulot. The world I live in is a world, we saw it last summer, with hot summers everywhere in Europe, big floods in India or Japan, huge droughts and fires in California, a world with biodiversity which is wiped out.
But we spoke to one environmentalist earlier who criticized him, who said, look, the government is about compromise, and we need him in, not out.
Oh, yeah, but what could he do? Nothing for me, to be quite frank.
So what do? You give up the environment ministry? No.
I don't know, but at the end of the day, the question is where he has more power, inside or outside. But I was one of the persons who were criticizing his action or non-action. And I can give a lot of examples. And I think it was what he did this morning, really big courage to do it publicly.
François Chardon?
I think for his reputation, it's certainly a shining moment in the sense that he can now restore a sort of purity that was tainted with his presence within the government. So it's probably a new start for him, and he will certainly, on a personal level, feel relieved. We've seen reports that only recently, in meetings with Hunter's association, he seemed to be almost like an oiled bird. I think a journalist used that metaphor. Because he was saddened to see that every decision was taken against his approach.
Let's talk about those decisions. We've just learned, and Marie-Monique mentioned it, we're coming out of the second hottest summer on record here in France. And yet, with oil prices down and the economy improving, CO2 emissions from new cars is actually on the rise overall. And we heard the Hulot lamenting in his resignation speech a culture of growth at all costs. He even cited the example of headlines that cheer when we roll out new giant vessels from the shipbuilding yards of the French Atlantic port of Saint-Nazaire. Is there a fundamental difference that can't be bridged between those who want growth and those who want sustainability for the planet?
No, and I'm going to answer, we do live in the same planet. For me, there is no combat that's more important now than, ecological combat. But, of course, when you're elected, when you're a minister, you have to work with what is. And that's the difficulty. I think Nicolas Hulot, he wanted it to be on the outside. He wanted to, have a louder voice, be able to say anything he wanted, and not work with, because once you're elected, it will always be small steps. You cannot change everything. You do not live in we live in an environment. We live in Europe. We live in the world. Sure, Macron is the president who said there is no planet B. It is something major for us.
Yes, but he didn't do anything. There is a problem. The question is right, what you said before. Can we keep on with an economic paradigm based on growth, unlimited growth, knowing that we are living on a planet where the resources are limited and the capacity of the planet to absorb our waste is also limited? And this is really, and the question he made this morning, Nicolas Hulot, he said, will we be able, to change our way of production and consumption? And what your government, the government of Mr. Macron is doing, is really exactly the contrary to what we should do. And this is a problem for him, for Nicolas.
Specifically on what?
For instance, I would just give you an example. Last week, the government just authorized a privatization of our dams, hydroelectric dams, which provide 11% of our power. This is renewable energy for sure. When you are Minister of the transition of, as
environmental transition,
yes, Nicolas was, you can imagine to privatize all assets, to have a really good transition to renewable energy and a transition in energy. It's just one example. He had to authorize, for instance, the import of palm oils from Indonesia. For a refinery of Total in the south of France, yes, to make biofuels, And I know that for him it was really the contrary to what he said all the time. How can you import 500,000 tons of palm oils to make biofuels, and which will destroy the forest in Indonesia and contribute to climate change and kill all the orangutan? Yes, these are all examples, and I can speak about glyphosate also. He had to renounce to a lot of things, and he said that this step-by-step policy he was supposed to do was not able to cope with the big challenges we have. And the challenges are loss and extinction of biodiversity and climate change.
He also said that France was doing more for environment than other countries. And so I think you're deforming a little bit what he actually said.
It's not about one country.
No,
Can you give an example?
I'm quoting him exactly there. He said France is doing more than other countries. That's an exact
Here is the problem.
quote.
Here lies the problem. The environment is not about one country. It's about all together or nothing. It's a revolution. revolution.
just said.
Either
Yes.
ecology is a revolution. And we have to take a step toward this, saying we can't live in this world of slave to the money, of finance, of capitalism, of productivism, saying that this is the truth of being state have to compete all the time. If we compete, we fuck up the planet.
All right, let's listen to what the French president had to say. Emmanuel Macron on a barnstorming tour of Denmark and Finland to drum up support for his multilateral approach to Europe was asked about Nicolas Hulot's resignation.
I think that in 15 months, this government has done more than any other for the environment in such a short time, any other government. The decision to shut down coal power plants, our engagements on hydrocarbons, the actions to prepare an energy strategy that will soon be put into place. Real decisions on transport, engagement on the European and international level. Ask anyone if France is absent from international action on climate. And there's more to come.
Just very briefly, there's your answer. He's talking about a multilateral approach.
Yeah, sure. If it's the One Giant Planet Summit, which is a One Giant Selfie Summit, where people come with Schwarzenegger and take selfies and go back. If it's meeting with the big boss of the biggest companies in Versailles or in the Élysée and saying, oh, guys, let's be nice to the planet, and they do nothing and say, yeah, sure, let's take the money and try. This is not how you make the ecology real. People want now a survival plan.
For the planet.
Future, yes.
We're going to pick up where we left off when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and France's president has just lost his most popular cabinet member. Environment Minister Nicolas Hulot overruled in the little over 1 year that he's been in government on several key issues, and announcing his break with the government in a spectacular fashion, live on Breakfast Radio. With us to talk about it, Marie-Monique Robin, documentary filmmaker, also the author of The World According to Monsanto. Municipal Councillor Anne Le Breton, Deputy Mayor of Paris' 4th arrondissement, and from Macron's La République En Marche party. Communications consultant François Chardon, and the co-founder of the Modern World, Le Monde Moderne news website, Alexis Poulain. Before we get back to our panel, though, it's the end of summer seminar that's held every year for French business leaders. Our business editor, Stephen Carroll, is in the Paris suburb of Jouy-en-Josas. And Stephen, have your ears been ringing over this story today?
Sure.
I mean, it's certainly something people are talking about here. I spent the earlier half of the day trying to get people to speak to me on the record about Nicolas Hulot's resignation at the summer conference for MEDEF. I ended up having to resort to overhearing quite a lot of conversations about it, where people are saying, look, you know, it doesn't really change very much for them. And that is something that we did speak to some economists about earlier. For example, they were saying that the policies of the government on environment aren't likely to change, even if this does slightly destabilise the government. But there's no great worry from the business leaders that I've been speaking to today. And of course, we know business doesn't like uncertainty, and for them it seems that this doesn't really create any uncertainty for at least the policies that are going to affect business. Those are the policies that Edouard Philippe, the Prime Minister, was defending when he was here earlier. He did mention Nicolas Hulot's resignation, saying that the government was, as you've been discussing, determined to continue its environmental programme for the future as well. One voice that stood out, though, the people that I've been speaking to, is Bertrand Piccard. He's the man who flew the Solar Impulse aircraft around the world. He's become an environmental campaigner. Let's take a listen to what he told me earlier in reaction to Nicolas Hulot's resignation.
Nicolas Hulot this morning made a very, very clear statement about the urgency to react against all the environmental problems. He was very clear that it is today a very serious problem. But what he said should be said every day as a minister, and not only today when he resigns. You know, there is this famous sentence in France, a minister has to shut up or to leave. It's wrong, completely wrong. A minister has to speak up every day as a minister. And if something doesn't go well, he has to say it.
All right, so weighing in definitely on the side of you're better in than out if you want to change things. Stephen, we're talking a bit about this divide between those who are for, and I'm quoting Nicolas Hulot, growth at all costs, and those who say, look, it's a choice between saving the planet. After all, you got 1.7% growth forecast for France. Population growth is only 0.4%. Is growth as we know it sustainable? Is that one of the things that's being talked about?
Well, it certainly is in terms of policies of what's going to continue to sustain the growth that France has seen. I mean, confidence amongst French business owners and entrepreneurs is unusually high for France. When you look over the past 10 years, we had record highs in those surveys earlier this summer. So it is something that we know business leaders are feeling good, and this is the time, they say, for the government not to let up on economic reforms that are going to necessarily affect them. It's whether or not they'll be able to do so, of course, is a much more open question. Interestingly, business leaders that I've been speaking to are saying really the environment is important for them. It's not only something that they care about, but also it's something they feel is an opportunity. And we know that big French groups are heavily invested in things like renewable energy and carbon reduction. And we know that French business as well have come under huge pressure from the government to commit to targets, particularly, I suppose, under the last government in the wake of the COP21 climate conference. We know that they have all of the CAC 40 businesses have said that they do believe this is a very important issue. This is one of the key risks, in fact, facing businesses. So it is something that's both discussed on the agenda here and off as well. But the state of the economy, for now, everyone seems pretty optimistic that at least growth is sustainable if it's not going to increase.
Stephen Carroll reporting live from the French Business Leaders Seminar at the MEDEF. Many thanks for joining us in the France 24 debate. Quick reaction on that, Alexis Poulain?
Well, I think there's two schools now. Is that the people who believe that it's not too late, and the people who, like Nicolas Hulot this morning, are shouting and saying, if we don't make this ecological revolution, we are all dead. And clearly...
But you heard Stephen there talking about how, well, you know, the business leaders are addressing it, and they have plans for a transition, and that it makes good business sense.
Yeah, sure. Saying, like, the oil is still there, and as long...
Talk of green bonds and...
But we could speed up the green bonds, we could speed up the renewables, we could speed up all this, and we could also get rid of, maybe at some point, nuclear. There is no plan for this. There is no will for this, because the business is paramount, and what they want is the money. What they want is this trade. The international trade is a nonsense. We have CETA, we have TAFTA, we have these big deals, and every time it's like, hurrah, look, we got deal with Japan, with New Zealand, with Australia. It's so far. We're going to send big ships full of beef to these countries. Why?
Or milk to China.
Money. We have to free ourselves, like Nicolas Hulot freed himself from the government, from this logic, which is the death logic. It's about making money. It's not about preparing the future.
Anne Le Breton?
I don't understand what you would think you would do if you were in power now immediately. What you're offering
immediately,
is just,
well, you do the one giant planet selfie, but you make it real.
But you would not be able to do
get the money,
anything
get the
of what you're... you would not be able to do a single thing that you have just mentioned. But I think...
Which one, for example?
I think Emmanuel Macron has done a lot more for climate change, trying to get Trump back into the Paris Agreement.
Who cares about Trump? The big cities are in.
Please.
Trump is pretending.
Climate change, nobody cares about America.
No,
of course, the United States are a very important part of climate change.
You know,
it's an
two men discussing on the table. It's about the world.
It's an international question.
Yes.
Much more. France by itself cannot do anything major for climate
Absolutely.
change. It has to be done on an international level. And Nicolas Hulot, I think, maybe lost an opportunity to have a very strong voice that he could have expressed every single day. He chose to express it. I hope he will continue to be very active on the subject from outside. But I personally think he would have been more useful inside, trying every day,
because it's pretending, and he doesn't want to pretend anymore. I think this guy is true.
This morning he said he tried all the time. He said also that all the lobbyists are very welcome in the government. Actually,
well, I want to say something about the lobbyists. You know, there is one, as far as politicians are concerned, there is only one lobby that counts, is who votes. And in France, the Green lobby is much more powerful than industrial lobby, because they are the people who have convinced French people that it's an important question. And so I don't understand when you talk about industrial lobby, because in the end, French politicians are going to listen to people who vote for them. And this is an important question now for everybody in the world. And the Green lobby has succeeded in, pushing its agenda forward much more than in
Marie-Monique Romain, let me get your reaction to the reaction of the head of the powerful French farm workers union. She is saying that we're for a pragmatic ecology and it's a transition that takes place over a long period of time, and maybe Hulot was too impatient on that.
You are quoting, I guess, Christiane Lambert, of course. I know her very well. She's part of the problem, actually.
How so?
Just take an example, food. We were very hopeful with the proposal of having a new law on food, but actually what happened is it was almost nothing, And we could do a lot, just to reduce our greenhouse gas emission, for instance. If we the French nation, the government, will promote really a transition in food production and really encouraging organic agriculture, which is not the case, to just cut the help for organic farmers right now, And we could do a lot. Helping young people to have organic farms everywhere. I know a lot of them who just can't have some piece of farm to grow organic food. It's not what was done. I know that Nicolas was very disappointed with finally what happened with the law on food, the food law, as we call it. It was really not
as ambitious as the one he wanted.
No. It was not. And this is an example where we could give an example to the rest of the world.
Even on that, I'm sorry, I don't agree with you, because if we cannot change immediately to a different kind of agriculture, because what we do in that case is we import, from other countries, and so. It is the reality, and you cannot ask French people. The reality is you cannot ask every French person to see their food basket go up 20%. We're in Europe. We don't even have the right to forbid imports. We're not. France is not by itself. We are within the European Union. We cannot take those decisions by ourselves.
François Chardon, let me ask you: is this a turning point? First of all, for the way Emmanuel Macron is perceived on the world stage. He's seen as a champion of the environmental cause.
We've seen, obviously, a lot of echo to this resignation in the international media. But I think over the past months, there's been quite a few blows to the image and the reputation of this majority. And so what really Hulot is leaving is a sinking ship in terms of...
A sinking ship?
In terms of reputation.
In terms of reputation.
On that subject.
He's saving his own reputation, probably, on the long run.
Well, you think this is that much of a turning point, that Emmanuel Macron's presidency is in trouble? And
I think this summer has been very, very hard on him.
There was the scandal involving his personal bodyguard.
To note it. I mean, yes, indeed, the rogue aide and the way it was handled proved quite.
But it's early days. He's got 3.5 years left in his presidency.
Very strong words there.
I mean, in terms of image, of course.
Well, I think even that is a bit...
Is it though?
34%, it's less than Sarkozy at the same time, for instance.
More broadly, François Chardon, is it...
It's very low, for sure, yes.
Yeah. And you know also what's happening in the rest of Europe. And every presidency, it goes faster. And we know what we're also facing. Look what's happening in Germany. So, I don't think we're in a sinking ship, and I think we should try to hold the ship up.
Macron engineered his victory in 2017 thanks to this unprecedented coalition that brought together people from the center-right and people from the center-left. Hulot's resignation, does it mean that the left-wing people are going to go away?
I think they left for a while. They've been leaving quite a lot. The question is this center-right electorate going to stick? I think as long as the commitment to the policies remain, and we just heard that that the policy on the environment isn't likely to change, I think this electorate is not going to leave. It's not such a shift. I mean,
so we're not a sinking ship.
I would say you're a damaged brand.
I think Macron was elected because a lot of people like myself, actually, we didn't want to have Marine Le Pen, and we just voted for Macron because we didn't have any choice, and we just
that's
have to
important
remember a lot of people. I mean, 24% of the people who he was elected, but just only 24% of the people. The rest of the people are people like me, and this was luck for him because
It was a majority. It's not luck.
Well,
majority.
I think what happens with Nicolas Hulot is happening with most of the French people is that the promises that were at the beginning of Emmanuel Macron and the government, the New World and the ecology first and all the big promises were not kept. And people start to get very disappointed and saying, well, what are we in for? What did we vote it for?
But his reforms, whether you like them or not, are passing, and
really,
the opposition
so
the opposition is weak.
The opposition is not so weak. Look what happened with
any government has ever passed them.
Well, not so many things have happened in the first year.
What has not happened in the first year?
Again, saying we're fast and we're going to reform this country. That
we have an agenda. We have an agenda, and we have been passing all the reforms we said we were.
Oh, yes.
Easy ones. No, we come with the pensions. Just you wait. It's going to be quite
easy ones. Some
difficult.
other governments
Actually, the opposition is getting back in the game, and you see them now having more voices, getting back and saying, well, no, we know who these people are, we know what's going to happen, let's fight. And I think this whole branding process, the storytelling and what Macron promises is just crumbling down. And it's not a sinking ship, but maybe it's a sandcastle going back into the sea. So we'll have to wait and see.
That's what you hope it's going to be, but
to damage the reputation, you know how hard it is to get back a reputation. You know, it takes a second to just lose it. It takes a year, 2 years before going back. Emmanuel Macron will have a hard time going back to the level of trust he had when he was elected.
Of course.
I will choose to disagree.
Well, that's a choice.
Yeah, the battle that's playing out with the resignation here, and again, I come back to this Macron model, which was saying on the campaign trail, I'm neither left nor right. I'll take the best ideas.
We know he's really right, and very right. Because all the reforms you are speaking about are all right reforms. And this is now quite clear. And there are many people disappointed about that because he was supposed to have two legs, you know, right leg and a left leg, but actually just has one or two, which are right legs. And this is the reason why this is a sinking boat, because I agree with you, it's a sinking boat. I'm traveling a lot in France for my documentaries and making a lot of conferences and speaking with many people. There are many people disappointed, seeing the trend, which is really all. He has this very, I guess, difficult image for it, but the image of working for rich people, and I have to say, I can give you a lot of examples. Many reforms which has been taken.
A redrawing of the political landscape, which we're seeing all over Europe right now. François Chardon, as we speak, he's off canvassing the Danes and the Finns ahead of the European elections that are going to be taking place in the spring. Meanwhile, you have other forces with the visit of Hungary's Prime Minister to Milan to meet with Italy's far-right Interior Minister. This redrawing of the political landscape, is it over? Because when you listen to Marie-Monique Robin, you have the sense that you have right now that he's just a traditional leader, and we're back to the traditional left-right divide.
Well, we've seen a lot of skepticism over the notion of a new world in politics, and a lot of disappointment revolves around this notion of an exemplary regime that is a bit fading, but still you've got this commitment to Europe, which is central in the presidency. So in that sense, I think he's on his battleground. and he's really committed in that field. So it's going to be an interesting next year.
Who are his allies in Europe, if ever? Because he's going to have a party from scratch. I'll put the question to you, Anne Le Breton, running for the first time in the European elections.
Oh yes, but that's very much our central subject.
Right.
And
so who are your allies in Europe for?
Well, all the progressive parties, and I
mean, will this?
I think that is.
Is it more? Why not just join then the EPP, the centre-right bloc, which has Angela Merkel, CDU, and other parties that are like-minded?
Well, I think we're trying to get a larger group and really trying to get Europe to come together, beyond the boundaries of France. And I hope we can, try to reunite French people against this European idea, because a lot of the parties who are going to be opposing us do not have that strong commitment to Europe. And I think young people in France now have a much stronger idea of Europe. There's maybe a generation gap. Where you saw that when Brexit happened, that the vote of the younger people was very different from the older generation. And I hope that you agree that we need a stronger Europe. I hope that's not you.
It all depends.
Yes.
No, we have no choice. We're Europeans, whatever. The question is what Europe we want.
Yeah.
Do we want an ecological Europe? Do we want a social Europe? Do we want a Europe where actually the countries do not compete and do not say, oh, this is not my fault, but the other? Look at the Italians. What happened is that we left them over and saying, oh, you'll have our help, but later on. Look at the Greeks. They say, oh, you want to stay in the euro? It's going to cost a leg. Fine, give me your leg, you get the euro. Is that Europe we want? That's the main question of what's going to happen next year.
We agree then we need more Europe.
No, we need a very different Europe.
Very different Europe. This
more
is
Europe.
Difference.
Europe, we have enough, I think. What we need is a very different Europe now. And this question is going to be key. It's like the debate is not about nationalism and progress. It's about, do you want a Europe that works for the people, or do you want a Europe that works for the bankers? That is the question that we'll have to answer next year.
All right. We'll continue, of course, to monitor this. I want to thank you, Alexis Poulain. I want to thank Marie-Monique Robin, Anne Le Breton, François Chardon. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Charlie James.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
So we were talking about at the outset, we couldn't find a precedent of either Britain or Germany or France. In fact, if any viewers do have one, tweet us on the hashtag F24Debate, if someone resigning live on air like that.
Well, and I would say this definitely wasn't an accident. Hulot is a former TV presenter.
Because the jury here is divided about this.
He understands how the media works. Well, maybe I can make my case. We'll see how you
let's
feel
see.
after
All
this.
right.
He understands how the media works, and I want to point out a few things that point to how this resignation created much more buzz than if he had just issued a statement or done something more traditional. So one, of course, is doing this live on a videotaped radio show. It's a huge hook, and many of the international outlets that covered it put that in their headline. You can see it here on CNN, also on BBC. And another thing that this does is it creates a piece of video that can be shared over and over again on television, online. And so that gives the story much bigger legs than if it was a one-time thing or a piece of paper. It's a harder visual that way. The second thing is the element of surprise. Hulot said that his own wife didn't know that he was going to do this, much less Macron or the Prime Minister. Anytime you catch people off guard like that, it's going to make a bigger splash and add to the drama and clickability of the story. And the last thing, I think, is the issue that really seemed to push him over the edge, which is the relaxation of those controversial hunting laws.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about that. You're
yes,
right. Well, just one word on this. Because he lowered the license fee from 400 to 200 euros for hunting season.
There was a meeting yesterday where a lobbyist came in. He was not invited, and Nicolas said this morning that it was really the the drop too much, you know.
The straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he said that the decision reminded him of how strong lobbyists can be in the government. I think that because he's an environmental activist and he had a show about animals and nature, this is an element that people can really, the general public can easily understand. Sometimes, things with pesticides or climate change, that can be a little difficult for everyone to really get all the elements of. But something like animals being killed, it's really understandable to the general public how this would be something that really upsets him. So also, I want to point out some examples of how his strategy seemed to work. French television channel LCI calling his exit a media blaze of glory. Journalist Vivian Verneau calling it a great moment, a big moment of filmed radio. And France Inter, the station, of course, that it was that the interview happened on, tweeting from a kind of post-interview reflection that the host did, where they called it a moment.
A debrief of the...
A debrief of the interview.
And NKM on the metro.
Yes.
And they called it a moment of grace, a unique moment. Now, not everyone said that they were surprised. Greenpeace put out a statement today saying that the resignation of Hulot is not surprising, as the environmental and climate issues have not been the height of urgency since his arrival in government. So they did not seem to be surprised. However, Hulot said that he hopes that his act is not an act of resignation, but one of mobilization. And evidently, he wanted to make as big of an impact as possible to spark that mobilization. And it seems like this worked.
You called it a spectacular, sort of a flash in the pan moment. But then, does it fade away afterwards?
Probably so.
Flash in the pans usually do.
Yeah.
Could.
We'll see.
All right, so we'll see over... History will tell us whether or not it was indeed something that will mobilize people, as you say. Charlie, James, I want to thank you. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.